Yuji is going crazy in the manga right now, declaring the final battle against the strongest of all time, Ryoma Sukuna. This begs the question, if we put this current Yuji into a different arc, say the Culling Games, would he prosper? Well, in today's video, that's exactly what we'll find out. What's up guys, Restless Gambler here, and in today's video, we'll be going over Yuji versus the Culling Games. Today with me, I have Salad Bar to help me find out who can really hold current Yuji in the Culling Games. Does the guy even lose? Let's find out. Before we get into the video, YouTube put me in a genjutsu that showed me only 16% of you guys are subscribed to the channel.
Why are you showing me all this?
If you enjoy JJK videos like these, go ahead and subscribe. You get more videos and we'll both be happy. Currently in the manga, Yuji has just undergone not only a 1-month time skip, but an awakening mid-battle against Ryoma Sukuna upon using a black flash. This begs the question, where exactly does bro scale at the moment? I'll let Salad give us the facts.
Thanks for having me here because I like to take any chance I can to talk about my goat Yuji. I'll start off by covering the scaling for Yuji and the abilities for him too. Specific calculations aren't really as necessary since we could just rely on regular scaling. Normally I would like to go more in depth, but I think regardless of where you scale Yuji, it's simpler and more effective to just say X is stronger than Y, instead of trying to calculate if he's city block level, town level, whatever. Shinjuku Yuji is stronger than pretty much anyone in the Culling game, at least in terms of who we're going to be covering in this video. Same goes for durability too. Ryu seems to be somewhat of an exception though, because Sukuna directly states that Shinjuku, Yuji, and Yuta aren't as durable as Ryu was. Although that was before Yuji awakened, so take that as you will. That specific matchup's going to be really interesting, especially because of Ryu's output. But as for everyone else, Yuji's pretty comfortable here. As for speed, things get a little bit more convoluted, especially since speed is so contentious in JJK. Thankfully we can keep it simple for this topic. Yuji's speed is at worst relative to Yuta. He was keeping up with him and fighting alongside him for a while. Mind you, this is Shinjuku Yuta who is stronger than the previous arc's Yuta, so let's use the bare minimum. This scaling means that at absolute worst, his speed being on Yuta's level would mean he's at least comparable to Hikari, specifically Culling Game Jackpot Hikari, who of course also kept up with Kashimo. Again, I'm using this as the absolute lowest baseline, because on top of this we of course see Yuji reacting to Sukuna's attacks and keeping up with him somewhat. Granted, Sukuna was being constantly attacked and he's fighting a bunch of people at once, but this is impressive nonetheless. And again, it doesn't matter where you place the exact calculations for this speed. If you think these characters are hypersonic, if you think they're almost light speed, it really doesn't matter. Because again, we could just use basic X is greater than Y scaling. And it gives us a very solid baseline to work with because obviously Kashimo is one of the people he'll fight here, while we could also use the Yuta comparison for the Sendai Colony fight, and so on. Yuji at absolute worst will keep up with everyone he's fighting here. But of course by now, he's way stronger and faster, because not only is this after his training, but he's also stronger after his awakening too. So Yuji outspeeds everyone here, unless Kashimo pulls out his curse technique. And this is for all types of speed, combat speed, movement speed, and reaction speed. Yuji's definitely one of the fastest fighters. Now on to his abilities. Yuji's bag is really deep right now. A lot of people don't realize how versatile he is, so let's break down what he's capable of. First off, the most obvious part of his moveset is his curse technique, Shrine. It works basically like Sukuna's. It's not as potent right now, but still, works pretty similar. And even though his cleaves and dismantles are weaker, on top of that, Yuji has soul perception and soul attacks. On its own, this is huge because he could basically bypass durability and punch your soul. But now he could even use Shrine on the soul. In chapter 263, he does this to Sukuna, and in 264, Sukuna mentions how it's really effective on reincarnated sorcerers. This is very important for the fights later on, because he is fighting a lot of reincarnated sorcerers. He also has blood manipulation. This can be used for attacking and also healing. He can't use it as well as Choso, but he can use a lot of similar things. Hidede Choso's helps do some things, like convergence for example, but he's also been shown to use weaker versions of techniques seemingly on his own. Like in chapter 247, it's implied Yuji used convergence without Choso, since he was temporarily out of the fight. But more importantly, blood manipulation helps with healing, specifically creating blood and also stitching things back together. And this is just what we know for now. He might have more blood-related abilities. And on top of that blood healing, he has reverse curse technique. He's no Hikari of course, but his healing is still pretty potent, especially with what I just mentioned. Yuji also has a domain, and we don't know what it does just yet as of recording, and hopefully the next leak night doesn't screw up your video, because I've had that happen before. Anyways, even though we don't know what it does specifically, it's still useful for a guaranteed hit, and for domain clashes, so keep that in mind. Yuji's also great with black flashes, because once he's in the zone, he sets records with how many he hits. He's absurdly strong as is, but he's buffing that with these black flashes. Divergent Fist can also be used to throw off opponents, especially in tandem with soul perception, and Yuji can use Binding Vows if he needs to. One last thing, he's resistant to poisons, and that's somewhat relevant, but like for only one fight. Yuji's not only incredibly durable and physically strong, but he's relentless. Pain and challenges won't stop him. In short, he's a monster. And for incarnated sorcerers, he's their worst nightmare. He could essentially separate them from the person they've taken over, assuming he could hit them.
Yeah, so Yuji basically went from the most bagless character in the entire series to a bag matched by only a select few characters. But beyond all this Yuji glaze, let's put this guy into the Culling Games and find out how exactly he performs. Here's how this video will go. We'll be replacing the main combatant of each fight with Yuji, and the support, if any, will still be there. So for example, against Noaya, Yuji will replace Maki, with Noritoshi, the Kamo guy, and the Katana guy still being there to support. I'll start off with Tokyo Colony 2 because I know you wanted to see what's going on in the thumbnail. In this colony, there were 3 fights but 2 antagonists. The first fight we saw was Hikari versus Charles, and it starts on the Ferris wheel. Now, Charles is a weird case because the only reason bro ever got his technique off against Hikari was because of how careless he was against him in the beginning. As a reminder, Charles' curse technique is G War Staff. He summons a huge pen that he aims to draw blood from you with, and if he does, he gains a second of precognition regarding your moves. This is how Charles avoided being one-shot by Hikari, because he got precognition off him and dodged his punch. But notice how I said one-shot. The guy is a regular human after all. I doubt he can even reinforce his body with curse energy. If base Hikari before the time skip can one-shot you, you're getting sent to the gulag by Yuji. Like Salad said earlier, Yuji should be at the very least relative to Jackpot Hikari, who completely eclipses his base counterpart. To be honest, even if Yuji uses blood manipulation giving Charles a chance to get precognition, I don't think it helped in the slightest, because even with 2 seconds of precog on Hikari, Charles couldn't touch him. And so Yuji would bliss him even harder than Hikari did when he perception blitzed him and one-shot him with a punch. He'd be laid out like Kusakabe, to be honest. The next fight is against Kashimo, and I'll just place Yuji where Hikari was and work from there. Now earlier, Salad said that Yuji would be at the very least relative to Kashimo, but I argue that's not even the case. During Hikari's fight with Kashimo in Jackpot, he literally starts blitzing him when he decides to up the ante of his attacks. And no, I'm not talking out of my ass like everybody thinks I am, because Kashimo literally says Hikari suddenly got faster. Yuji would completely overwhelm the shit out of Kashimo, and the reason I say this is because he'd not only be faster, but if he can get punches in like Hikari did, Kashimo is in big trouble. Throughout Yuji's entire time fighting Sukuna so far, he's been whittling down his connection to Megumi slowly but surely, and recently he started an even more effective method to do so. His soul punches alone started to take a toll on Sukuna himself, and to remind you guys, Sukuna's control over Megumi might as well be greater than any other reincarnated sorcerer. On top of having a large curse energy disparity like Kashimo and the others, Sukuna bathed in cursed spirit blood, then broke his spirit multiple times, starting by killing Megumi's own sister with his technique. Then Yuji pulls up and starts separating their souls with a couple punches. And when Yuji stopped doing this and unlocked Shrine, he started using them to cut the boundary between their souls, and we get the most important statement yet. Sukuna himself, the king of curses, says that Yuji's technique is lethal to any incarnated sorcerer. If Yuji can riddle Kashimo with the punches alone, Kashimo would literally be thrown up he'd be throwing up himself, just like Sukuna was doing? I don't know, bro. But even if Yuji doesn't do that, Kashimo's control over his body would weaken and he'd literally just lose regularly. The only potent thing Kashimo has is his lightning, which would easily be healed because of Yuji's insane reverse curse technique. There's literally nothing he can do about Yuji's superior stats. Bro is cooked. If Kashimo unleashes his technique, which is completely unlikely and doesn't count for this, he'd start dominating the fight with Yuji. The portrayal of his speed is just too immense for me to say that Yuji can keep up. In my opinion, Yuji would just get evaporated eventually, and the only counterplay is his domain, which we know nothing about yet. This may not age well after the next chapter, but I don't really care. Anyways, with that colony done, Yuji exits with a record of 2-0. Let's keep track of his score throughout the video. I'll let Sally go over Tokyo Colony 1 now.
First is Yuji's fight with Higuruma, which is the easiest fight to cover here. Even if Yuji doesn't go in with the knowledge of how this fight goes, it's still Yuji and he'd probably act the same way. As it is, this version of Higuruma physically can't compete with Yuji. But Yuji also doesn't have Sukuna as part of him, so Higuruma's domain won't be able to charge him for Sukuna's crimes. In chapter 166, Higuruma notes that Sukuna was the one being considered guilty for mass murder, not Yuji. And on top of that, Yuji initially didn't have a curse technique to confiscate. Here, his curse technique would be confiscated first. And he has 2 curse techniques. He's an insanely hard counter for Higuruma. For one, he doesn't have a crime that would get him the death penalty. And even if he gets confiscation, he has 2 curse techniques, and is ridiculously strong anyways. Originally he fought without cursed energy in general and was fine. So this time around, he has multiple layers of protection, and he was fine regardless, so he dog walks Higuruma here. Sorry, Goat. But the same goes for the next fight as well with Reggie's group. First off, Hazanoki's an incarnated sorcerer. If he gets hit even once by Yuji, he's done for. And Yuji's not going to be too affected by his explosions, especially with his durability and healing. Remy won't be a match to Yuji either, especially because her scorpion hair seems to rely on poison. Against the guy who has poison resistance, she's kinda screwed, and she's not really too strong otherwise. Hari also gets mocked by Megumi, so same goes for Yuji. Reggie is the main challenge here, of course. His technique is insanely unpredictable, and can be used for many situations, but the outcome of this fight is pretty much set in stone. Megumi performed really well here, and trust me, I'm one of Megumi's few defenders, we're a dying breed, but Megumi in this fight is not pulling the stuff Yuji's been doing in Shinjuku. It is worth noting against Yuji's domain, Reggie can defend against a sure hit with Hollow Wicker Basket, but in the long run it doesn't matter much. Yuji is too fast and too strong for him to compete, and he's also a hard counter for an incarnated sorcerer like him. At least with Higuruma, he doesn't have to worry about his soul being separated like that. This is a huge advantage for Yuji, but even without separating his soul from his vessel, Yuji might be too much to handle here in general. Thankfully he clears this colony pretty easily, so now I'll hand the video back over.
Yuji just exited that colony with an extra 5 wins, putting his record up to a crazy 7-0. But now here's where the fun begins, because I've been waiting for this. Yuji versus the Sendai Colony. In this colony, Yuji is by himself and he has to run a little gauntlet to come out on top, and that gauntlet starts with Druve. It's actually stated that bro has been incarnated twice, so you know what that means? It means he's a Yuji victim, that's what. Yuta one-shot him in base, so I don't think it'd be crazy to assume Yuji could do the same, especially considering he has Shrine. But right after Druve dies, the cockroach appears out of hibernation. Now, the way Yuta handled the cockroach was by first swatting away the swarm, cutting its arm off, and then using RCT on it. Yuji actually doesn't have RCT output, so the best he can do is just aim to exercise it regularly. Going back to the Yuta fight, the sword actually only works if it manages to pierce you, because when it does, it spawns cockroaches inside of you. It of course pierced Yuta in the original, but post time skip, Yuji and Yuta improved their reinforcement tenfold. I don't even think the sword would work on bro. If the sword doesn't work, everything just gets way easier. Yuji can use his blood to explode for the swarm of roaches and exercise the main roach the old fashioned way. Left, right, good night. Right after Yuta exercised the big roach, Uro came in immediately and hit him with an icebreaker, to which Yuta tanks pretty easily, which means that's good ease for Yuji. She then redirects Yuta's punches and basically makes hand-to-hand combat impossible. The question that immediately follows is, how exactly is Yuji supposed to actually fight Uro? Yuji's most potent ability against this colony is of course the fact that he can damage souls, but we've seen that if you can avoid it, you're good. Yuji is of course faster than Uro, but she was still fighting relatively well against Yuta. Not to mention there's another even stronger monster that makes the fight a free-for-all. But that's a good thing, let me cook. If Yuji does the same thing as Yuta and gets up close to Ryu, I think that's how the tides would change, because no one is stepping to Yuji in hand-to-hand combat. The real question here is if Ryu would be able to acknowledge what Yuji is doing, because unlike Sukuna, Ryu is unconsciously suppressing the vessel's soul with his cursed energy. If Ryu never notices what the hell is happening, Yuji is sending this guy's soul packing. His output while being the best in the verse would plummet because of Yuji's soul damage, and eventually Yuji would suck his soul from him. And eventually Yuji would just beat the soul out of him. That leaves Yuji alone with Uro, who again isn't in the same predicament as Ryu because she has a counter to it. But just as we found out the counter, we found out that Yuji would use his domain to get the job done. However, unlike Sukuna, Uro actually has a domain at the moment as well, so they clash domains. But the cockroach from earlier gave birth just like in the original, and that would lead to both domains falling. So now it's Yuji versus Uro without cursed techniques, and Yuji would just win. She has no counter to the onslaught of attacks Yuji would let off, especially considering he's just faster than her. The cockroach's offspring also wouldn't be a problem because it's even weaker than his father, and Yuji exercises it with ease. With Yuji defeating Ryu, Uro, Druve, and the cockroach twice, Yuji walks out the colony with a staggering 12-0 record. This leads us to the final colony, Sakurajima. I think this is the first time in the video where Yuji actually gets some help. So against Cursed Naoya, it'll be Yuji, Noritoshi, and the 2 crackheads. They of course come in later, so right now let's just focus on the first 2. Now, if you go reread the fight, the reason everything got so bad was because Naoya transformed. He started off as a cursed wound, but he was still able to blitz Noritoshi. It also caught Maki, but she was fast enough to block. Yuji is faster than this Maki, and relative to the Maki that later was too fast for Alright, basically Yuji is faster than this Maki, and he's relative to the Maki who was faster than the version of Naoya that was faster than that. Man, basically Yuji is very fast. That means in this situation, while Kamo would still get blitzed, Yuji would also retaliate better than Maki did. In the chapter after he reveals himself, he starts taking damage from Norotoshi's arrows and a base soul split katana. Even if you want to be disingenuous and say Yuji can't hit harder than a base SSK, his attacks are way harder than the arrows Kamo sent. And so I don't even think Naoya can get past a couple soul cleaves, soul punches, or even his own piercing blood. Yuji's piercing blood, while not even fully mastered, still manages to damage Sukuna. Literally, the most worst case scenario realistically is that Naoya enters his cursed womb state and tries to transform, to which a double piercing blood from Kamo and Yuji will literally evaporate him. But let's drop the realistics. I know you want to see what would happen if Naoya post transformation were to go against Yuji. After his transformation, he becomes way faster, fast enough to blitz Maki. And then she becomes fully realized and she's too fast for him. This Maki is relative to Yuta, who's relative to the current Yuji, so the exact same thing would happen here. Naoya's AP was so bad he couldn't take Kamo out the fight. His durability was so bad he got stopped by a Look at bro take this headbutt from this crackhead. Yuji would dominate this guy wholeheartedly. Punches, shrines, literally everything would prove effective against him. Let's still be charitable and say Yuji cuts him in half so his body appears in Oben's domain expansion. Well, 1, Yuji has simple domain and RCT, so he'd be able to get through the effects, but 2, he has his own domain expansion. We again don't have any info on it yet, so I won't assume he would just override it, but what I can say is that it will clash. And if it clashes, yeah, he's done. Yuji just has too much counters to bro, he would just get exercised completely and utterly. With that, Yuji exits the final colony with a total of 13 wins and 0 losses. He dominated Charles and sent Kashimo's soul to the other world. He entered Tokyo Colony 1 and cleaned house, easily defeating Higi, Reggie, and all of his goons. He went into the Sendai Colony and by chance of fate he manages to defeat all 4 in the deadlock with an extra cursed spirit from the cockroach. And finally, he easily dealt with Naoya in every single form. But what did you guys think? Let me know down in the comments. Again, go check out Salad Bar, his link is in the description. And I'll catch y'all in the next one.